There is a lot happening at the Munich Security Conference today. A lot of news, a lot of developments in the past few hours with European and US foreign leaders there. Ukraine's President Zelensky due to meet US VP, Vice President J.D. Vance, 2 days after Donald Trump had that 90-minute phone call with President Putin that appears to have significantly changed the dynamic in the Ukraine war. And J.D. Vance's speech has not gone down well with those in the room. And that's an understatement. He's been accused by European diplomats of lecturing them. Germany's defence minister has said Vance's speech was, quote, not acceptable and shocking. And there was barely an applause. Let's have a listen to some of that message from J.D. Vance today.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree.
So J.D. Vance calling on European leaders to engage, to listen. Well, the mantra of the whole Munich Security Conference going since the end of the Second World War is to interact with each other. Don't ignore one another. That's what is called the Munich Rule. It underpins the conference. Our foreign ministers are told that's what should govern the conversation. And the Security Conference, as I say, set up as a forum to meet allies for Germany after the NATO military alliance was created. So the worry today is that they are being lectured, being ignored. It goes further. J.D. Vance also called on European policy to be changed on immigration, referring as well to a recent car ramming attack by an Afghan suspect in the same city yesterday.
How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants.
J.D. Vance speaking there. Let's cross to Munich. Let's bring in Yevheniia KRAVCHUK, who is at the Security Conference, and a Ukrainian MP from President Zelensky's party, the Servant of the People Party. Great to talk to you tonight, Yevheniia. First of all,
thank you for having
were you
me.
in the room when J.D. Vance was speaking?
Well, I listened for sure his speech, and it was right after speech of European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. So maybe that's why it looked like a bit as a cold shower to those who were listening to the speech and coming from the European continent. But actually, J.D. Vance didn't say anything that he hadn't said before, or someone from the current administration said. And he did emphasize that Europe should step in more in the terms of security. That's also not something new.
Interesting, Boris Pistorius, Germany's defence minister, and foreign leader as well, Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, both saying it was shocking, it was not appropriate. You're saying this was part of the course of what you get with Americans. You didn't find it lecturing?
Well, it did look like a lecture, and actually afterwards I was the conversation was U.S. congressmen from both parties, and those who were coming from the Democrat side said the same thing, that they felt it did sound like a lecture. Well, in any case, this is a security conference that is in Europe, so it is important, and the United States administration comes to Europe to speak about security. I think it also has to be acknowledged, well, to my mind.
Given what he's also said today, because as I mentioned at the start, there's a number of developments. One of those, that he spoke to the Wall Street Journal. He said to the Wall Street Journal that basically Russia, after the Trump phone call on Wednesday, could face punishment, tariffs when it comes to energy. Also didn't rule out military force. Didn't go into any detail. That was vague, but that's very different, or at least harsher than the conversation where President Trump's been accused of appeasement, saying that it's unlikely that Ukraine would get NATO membership and get its old borders back pre-2014 after this Putin conversation. Where do you stand on that? A, do you trust Donald Trump on Ukraine, and J.D. Vance too?
Well, I truly believe that Trump's administration does want to end the war. The question is on what terms and what it will cost, not just Ukraine, but European continent and Europe, and whether this peace will be long-lasting and just. That is the main question, and what security guarantees will lie behind this possible treaty. So far, the plan hasn't been announced, and our delegation, and President Zelensky do not have the details yet. So it's hard to discuss. But indeed, this interview that J.D. Vance gave to the Wall Street Journal is probably the most strong words that were used, personally by him, but also by administration, saying that Russia will face consequences if the Kremlin will not cooperate. But yet we need to explore all the details. And also, I think the outcome of the war cannot be to reward the aggressor. I mean, if you attack another country, you need to be punished, not rewarded.
Do you think it was appeasement, Yevheniia, the conversation that Donald Trump had?
Well, I wasn't on the conversation, basically.
What he said afterwards. What he said afterwards, was that appeasement?
In True Social and everything, it's too early to say that the actual steps are appeasement. Of course, the tone of voice to Ukrainians that are suffering of the attacks by Russian Federation, it was too nice. But that's coming from our side. But we need to see the steps. That's the most important thing. The steps, concrete steps, and how to make Ukraine stronger. And also not to forget Europe in this process. And I think it's a very good decision to have this Weimar Declaration in Paris, actually, with the ministers of foreign affairs saying that we're not going to be set aside, because this is European continent and Ukraine will be part of EU eventually.
We're getting live pictures, Yevheniia, as we're talking. This is in the room right now at the Munich Security Conference between Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, his team on one side. J.D. Vance smiles, talks to the camera, what they call the press 5-minute, where they quickly do a round table before they go again. So this meeting happening now. Stay with us, Yevheniia. I want to bring in John Herbst as well. Also in Munich, the former US ambassador to Ukraine, 2003 to 2006, under President George Bush. Great to speak to you this evening, Ambassador Herbst. Can I ask you the same question? Well, Yevheniia is with us too. We're watching these live images, John. What did you make of what J.D. Vance said today? Diplomatically, was it shocking or not?
Well, I can understand why he ruffled feathers in Europe with his talk about the European and American values. His assertion that Europe was stepping back from those values, and his defense of the Trump policy on immigration. So that's part of it. But I think from my standpoint, what's most important is what relates to the security of Europe, the security of Ukraine, and the security of the United States. And we've seen in the past, since Trump won the election, I think we've seen the outline of Trump's basic approach. It's not official yet, but we keep hearing the same kind of ideas that they'll need to be compromised by both Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian compromise requires some territory and requires at least a 20-year moratorium on joining NATO. And Russian compromise would come in the form of accepting a demilitarized zone with European peacekeepers to deter future Russian aggression, and major arms to Ukraine to deter future Russian aggression. And some statements made by President Trump after his call with Putin have called into question whether he was going to hang firm on the things that would require compromise by Russia. But then I think Vance, in his interview with the Wall Street Journal, reaffirmed the concept that Russia has to compromise for this plan to work.
But if we look, John, given what Yevheniia said, you both kind of strike the most pragmatic tone right now, essentially saying, let's see where this goes. But when President Trump was asked in the Oval Office about President Zelensky. He said, well, he's got low ratings at the moment. There will have to be elections soon. You know, there was praise, there was warmth towards the conversation with Putin, and it really seemed in contrast, didn't it, with his words about Ukraine's leader?
Well, I would say that plus several other things he said in the Oval Office were problematic. But then he also said in the Oval Office, you know, that we can't let Russia take more of Ukraine. So that statement was, you might say, in lower voice, or rather was a one-off or two-off, whereas the other statements, which seemed to be warm towards Putin, less warm towards Zelensky, were more. So I can understand why people would be concerned. But when Trump made that one point about, well, we can't let Putin do more, you know, go further into Ukraine, that reaffirms the basic approach which I described, which they've all been talking about for the last, 2+ months.
Do you have a view, John? If we look at the mantra from 2022, the last time that President Biden, then President, spoke to Vladimir Putin, the line was nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, that it has to be an equal member at the table. And again, President Trump, when he was asked about that, said, that's a very interesting question. We will see about that. Which camp do you sit in as a Republican? Do you believe Joe Biden's measure was right? Or actually, are you kind of intrigued by what President Trump is doing now to try to bring about peace? Where do you sit?
Well, my view is actually pretty clear. I think the best policy, which Biden did not follow and which Trump is not following, would be to arm Ukraine to the teeth, allow them to shoot wherever they want to shoot. And I am confident that if we did that in a serious way, Ukraine would drive Russian forces maybe not completely out of its country, but largely out of its country, and make it extremely expensive for Putin to hold on to Crimea. But Biden didn't have the spine to do that, and I'm not sure Trump even understands what I'm suggesting. But Trump's policy, the one that I described, if it's pursued rigorously, could achieve a stable peace, not completely just because it would leave Russians on Ukrainian territory, and Ukraine would have to live with the awful occupation which the Russians impose, but it would ensure that the Ukraine, which is controlled by the Ukrainian government, by President Zelensky, would be secure. I don't think Putin is going to go for that. He wants more of Ukraine. But if Trump's going to be true to what he's laid out, he would prevent that. But you've raised some legitimate concerns.
Yevheniia, listening to John, I mean, one way that your party leader and your president has tried to deal with the new president, tried to get some sense of movement is, and talk us through this, am I right to say, in a sense, offering, with caveats, access to the rare minerals that needed to build and use electric vehicles and computers, things like lithium, which in the east of Ukraine, currently there are 2 sites that occupying Russian forces sit upon, in exchange for continued US presence. Tell us about that and whether you think that could be successful.
Well, we did have a visit of Minister of Finance of the United States just a few days before the Munich Security Conference, and there was a meeting with President Zelensky, and they discussed this possible mutual contracts with regards to the rare earth minerals and rare minerals as such. As I am informed, the decision had not been, approved or taken. And actually, I think part of the conversation that you showed, this meeting of Ukrainian and U.S. delegations, could be around this package, which is part of security guarantees, as American administration says. But just to understand, the rare earth materials, it's not something you go out and dig out of your backyard. It does need a lot of investment. It does need actually a normality, a normalized situation, because they do lie close to the front line. And basically it needs some investments in the factory building. It has a very difficult and complicated technological process. But on the other hand, if America will invest in that and have some businesses coming, having it as a mutual project with Ukraine, it means that America will value it and probably will try to, support or place some air defense system around these factories. But also, we do believe that Europe has to be in these conversations as well. Of course, America as a country is the biggest contributor of military aid, but European Union as an entity, as a union, did a lot, especially after 2022 as well.
Do you think, if we look back at this week, it will be remembered as the beginning of the end of the conflict towards peace? Do you believe that the significance of that moment with Vladimir Putin and its aftermath, what Donald Trump is doing, is going to achieve a peace?
I would like to believe that, and try to be optimistic, but still in these corridors, there is a picture of Vladimir Putin giving his famous Munich speech in 2007. They didn't take it out, take it off. And I wonder how many more years it will take to Western countries understand that Putin does not want peace, does not want to have normal relations with Europe, with United States. He just wants to come back to this imperialistic view of having the spheres of interest, and so on and so forth. And also what I know, that Ukrainians is such a nation, and it's truly, it's the war that is being conducted by the nation. It's not just some soldiers that are being paid fighting on the front. No decisions can be taken without agreement from Ukraine, both the political leadership, President Zelensky, Parliament, but also the whole people of Ukraine. It will be a long process, but I want to be optimistic that the first steps we're seeing right now.
We're just getting information from that meeting, to which Vladimir Zelensky has told reporters, we are talking to Vice President Vance, quote, "It is our first meeting, not our last meeting." John, I also want to run this by you. So we've had, listening to JD Vance, who's in the summit in Munich, you've got another senior figure, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, who almost got there, but his plane broke down, had a crack in the windshield, had to swap planes. We think he's on the way. And we have a third senior figure, the new Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, who avoided it altogether, called it a cocktail party, and did this with German troops running this morning. Let's take a look.
I'm with the rotational unit here, first cab. I'm with the rotational unit here, first cab.
John, have you been there in your time? Does the Munich Security Conference matter, or is it a cocktail party?
It's a little bit of both. There are key issues discussed and sometimes historic moments. Yevheniia mentioned Putin's dreadful Munich speech in 2007, which foreshadowed the aggressive policies pursued the last 15 years. And I think this conference is notable for, the first meeting between the second Trump team and our European allies. And as you mentioned, it's been a little bit unsettling, but it's part of the process by which they will acclimate to each other.
Great to talk to you both this evening. Thank you, Yevheniia KRAVCHUK, Ukrainian MP from President Zelensky's party. And John, thank you to you too, John Herbst from Munich, former US ambassador to Ukraine.